Hi, and welcome to another Bible study. This week we are looking at Genesis 15, which is all about promises, disappointments, questioning, and asking God, is any of this going to work out? Is any of it? And this story here is a rather pivotal chapter in the Abrahamic storyline. And it's one of those chapters where it's not very long, but it's kind of interesting. It's got some interesting components. And as we get into it, to recognize we are still in this is from the Yahwehist tradition. It's part of that J tradition, which is characterized by the name of God is Yahweh, and it's concerned with writing and justifying the political and social realities of the Israelite monarchy in the time of King David and King Solomon. And this is going to be really important as we get into this chapter to keep this in mind. And the theme of Jay's work is that one of the repeated human trial and failure, the human attempt to play God, and the inevitable failures as a result. Jay is writing, like I said, early monarch period, King David, King Solomon. So we're looking at 10th to 9th century BCE. And then we get one of the words that is used. It's used multiple times. It appears 5 times in this chapter. It's yirs, and it means to inherit. And what's interesting about this word that's translated as to inherit, it actually changes to meaning to possess. And that change in meaning is consistent with the new topic at work, which is in the final 15 verses of the chapter, is a foretelling of the acquisition of land. And then we are talking about a few interesting things. It's kind of a loose narrative, and the metaphor of deity as a battle shield. So God is being referred to as a battle shield is well known in some of the Psalms, like Psalm 3, Psalm 18, Psalm 115. But here it is associated with Abram. And it appears that actually a particular way of understanding God, a particular metaphor of God, is connected to each of the patriarchs. So Abram's son Isaac, Isaac's son Jacob. We've got Abram, which is associated with the metaphor that God is a shield to him. And then it's interesting because with Isaac, the metaphor is fear. And with Jacob, the metaphor is bull. So it's kind of a fascinating, just what is it kind of doing here? With 15:1, it functions as an announcement of the special metaphor of shield, like we were talking about. And this is how God is going to be known to Abram and to others who recognize God is with Abram. The conversation about Eleazar being an inheritor because Abram has yet to have a child, that Eleazar as a member of the household was in a position to inherit from Abram. And Eleazar now is kind of like used as Abram's reasoning, or Abram is like, well, I guess this is how we're going to go about it. God, you've made this promise, but I'm now going to take things into my hands. And so it's interesting because now what's happening is Abram's becoming impatient. He is disappointed that the promise that God made hasn't been fulfilled. And so he's getting anxious, and he is now taking control of this situation, which is kind of one of those things of going, do we ever take control of things that maybe we shouldn't be taking control of? And then as we move through this, it's an understanding that Abram not only is trying to take control, but is actually challenging God on, are you going to make good on this? And it's interesting to think about that as Abram is challenging God, because sometimes we're like, well, I can't ask or I can't challenge. And God still calls Abram. God still loves Abram. God still goes the journey of life with Abram, even when Abram questions, is struggling, is like challenging God. And maybe we've had those moments where we feel like we've called out to God for help, and we're not so sure that we're getting it in the way that we wanted it. With verses 7 through 21, there's all that evidence of challenging God. Abram wants evidence that God is going to come through. And so verse 8 is like, prove it, God. And what's interesting is with chapter 15, Abram wants to know, like he wants certainty in knowing that the promise will be fulfilled. Again, something that maybe we struggle with, of we have to know, we can't sit in the uncertainty. And God responds to Abram in two ways: by making a covenant, by offering an oracle while Abram sleeps. And Abram is then commanded to slaughter 3 animals bilaterally and then lay the carcass halves in rows. The author depicts this situation in which Abram is more than just asleep. He's been overpowered, and the ominous note foreshadows then the people's difficult fate, which God is about to proclaim. So there's a whole sense of just how deep this sleep is and the problem of it. With thinking about the ritual, though, of splitting the animals, that's kind of important for us to keep in mind, is that it's probably from the ancient Near East. It was a way to make a covenant, and it was like this promise, and the animal would be split in two, and so cut into pieces, and then the parties who are entering the covenant would pass through between the 2 separate pieces of the animal, and that would signal that they are ready to take upon themselves the obligations of the covenant. And then if you broke that covenant, it's also saying that if I do not keep it, then may I be as this animal, may I be cut into pieces. So in this instance, though, it's only God who goes through with that whole symbol of fire, and that God replaces the other human, that God does not ask Abram to walk between, but instead God walks between. And so it's a moment where God is showing, I'm going to be faithful no matter what, and characterizes Abram as struggling, and as Abram may not be able to keep this covenant. With the listing in verses 19 through 21 of all of the different peoples which are associated with the land, it may be the purpose of the author to emphasize the vast extent of the territory that's been promised to Abram. And what's really interesting, and this is the whole thing about knowing who wrote the chapter, who wrote this, with Jay writing it, that this promise only really gets fulfilled during the time of King Solomon, and you can find that in 1 Kings 4:21 and verse 24. And that's like 1,000 years later, and it's only for a really brief period of time, like it's a really short period of time. So it's kind of one of those things of, all right, is this list to reflect, is it connected to what Solomon has done? And so it's just one of those things to kind of keep in mind about the writer and when they are writing and why are they writing and why that particular kind of list of peoples in the territory expansion, which is also one of the ways that this has been misused. This passage has been misused by looking for legitimate or trying to legitimize actions of taking land from others. And so this is one of those passages that has been used to harm others. So what are some of the things that this passage is trying to convey? Abram was originally given a promise of land and descendants, but life went on, and he grew older, and he remained childless on a land that was not his own. And so in the midst of hopelessness, of unfulfilled promises, God reassures him that he is still shielded, that he is still protected. So it's like, all right, Abram, you're not getting it exactly the way you wanted it, but God is still with you. God is still shielding. God is still at work in Abram and in Abram's life and everyone around him. So we can think of this as the purpose of Abram is impatient to realize God's promise of children. So Abram tries to control the situation And so often our way is not God's way of doing things. And God tries to reassure Abram. So what does this matter today? Here are some questions that are kind of helpful for us to ask that can kind of help us translate this into our lives today. How often do we try to control things that are out of our control? How do we handle disappointments in life? And where is God guiding us that is out of our comfort zone? And so my hope is that you have found this helpful with different questions. And as you have read through chapter 15 on your own, may you find this passage helpful in recognizing that, sometimes when we don't get the things that we want in the way that we want it, we are not alone, but God is still guiding. And God's way is often, so often, not our way. May your day be blessed.